Bombardment. Welcome to the live stream section. Kiev is under intense bombardment as we speak. Ukraine is being pummeled from east to west, from north to south. If this meeting between the US president and Donald Trump, in Alaska did anything, it gave Russia more credibility, it gave Russia more power. And this is what the Americans are doing. Because they made a promise to their base that they don't want to get involved in any foreign war. So in order to fulfill that promise, they have to find a way out. America is still supplying Ukraine with weapons. They are still loading Ukraine with a lot of weapons. But this is what the US President Donald Trump is saying at this point. He's saying, well, we are not directly involved in it. We are supplying arms to the Europeans. The Europeans are buying weapons from us and they are giving it to Ukraine. So he's making it look like, on one hand, the US wants to disentangle itself from Ukraine. The US, I think it was Bassent, the Treasury Secretary, that said that America will now be profiting from selling arms. This was not the promise that Trump made when he came in. He said that it was a needless war, it was a waste of money, that America should not get involved, that if he was president, that this wouldn't have started or happened. But there you have the US president in Donald Trump now arming Ukraine to the teeth, loading Ukraine with a lot of weapons, and finding the right balance because the Europeans are putting him under duress. The Europeans have their own interests. And let's not forget, it's not just about the Europeans, it's also about the interest of the United States of America, which is to follow through on the minerals deal they did with the rare earth mineral stuff. Listen, this is not just about the US because if you remember, during the Biden administration, we had some rumors that BlackRock was buying up something and investing a lot of money, and they had some kind of interest in buying up, assets in Ukraine. And the talks also have interest in Ukraine. The Europeans also have interest. So this is now a battle between the Europeans and the Americans in who can have more leverage in Ukraine, if that makes any sense. Um, so they are loading Ukraine with a lot of weapons as we speak. Thank you for joining it. For those of you sharing the live stream, thank you so much. So this is America again, finding a way around it. And why Trump is claiming on one hand that, oh, we are not involved in it. This is not our fault. We are not the one that started it. If I was president, it wouldn't have started. He even said, during his campaign trail, this is easy. In 24 hours, I'll get the Russian and Ukrainian leadership to sit down and we are going to settle this. Well, America and the Europeans have spent close to $500 billion giving arms to Ukraine. So this is not just some weak country in Ukraine or, a country that we should say, oh, these poor Ukrainians. This is a war. This is a real bloody war as we speak. And Ukraine is spending far more money than Russia during the course of this conflict. Well, some people are saying that the money is being recycled in such a way that it goes back to Washington, D.C. So this is war for profit. This is a classical, war for profit game that we have been seeing on the international stage, especially after the Second World War, the Korean War. We saw the war in Afghanistan. We saw the Vietnam War. We saw the war in Iraq. So you now have the military-industrial complex being emboldened, acting in such a way that it's more about profit. And for Ukraine, it's about the defense of their territory. It's about territorial integrity. It's about dignity. It's about the right to fight for self-preservation and so on and so forth. But the Europeans are not seeing it like that. They are using Ukraine as a buffer. They are using Ukraine as a human shield against Russia. The Europeans are using Ukraine as a human shield against Russia. They are using Ukraine as a buffer between themselves and Russia. And let's not forget that this is just the beginning. Whatever the Europeans are saying, they know it is right that once Russia is done with Ukraine and they get what they want in Ukraine, the Baltic countries are going to be targeted because all these countries are bringing in a lot of firepower and wherewithal to the borders of Russia, making it difficult for Russia in the Baltic Sea. Let's not forget that the goal is to cut off the Suwalki Gap. They've tried it before to cut off the Suwalki Gap. During the course of this conversation, I'm going to be pulling up the map for those of you that are watching, live on YouTube for you to see exactly what I'm saying. So basically, you have the Suwalki Gap, which is a narrow corridor between Belarus and the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad, which enables the Russians foothold in the Baltic Sea and in the North Sea, if you like. because Russia depends on the European market to sell their energy. They depend on trading with Europe. Of course, they have relationship with China, which is to the east, but the Russians see themselves as European. Most of their economic activities and political activities, they align more with Europe because most part of Western Russia is in Europe, if you like. So this is the reality. And what we are seeing, in fact, what we saw today is the classical idea of hitting the shepherd and making the flock to flee. Think about it. You go, you strike the shepherd, and the flock will flee. It's no longer about Ukraine. Early this week, we heard that the Russians attacked a U.S. Military production site in Lvov, or around Lvov. And what happened during that attack on the on the areas around Lvov? America claimed that that factory was just there producing coffee. It's a coffee production shop, and you had people on CNN crying. People on. By the way, you need to understand that the media is in bed with the elites, is in bed with the oligarchs that are in power in most of these European countries and in the United States. This group of elites are the ones that control the media. This group of elites are the ones that control the pharmaceuticals. They are the same people that control the banks. They are the same people that control the military industrial complex. And there's a number I'd love to pull up for you guys to see. And we can argue within the time period of 2014 till date, some of the top arms manufacturer in the world, and we can pick any year. Out of the 20 of them you see there, I can argue that between 10 and 12 will be from the United States. Between 10 and 12. And the top five, I don't think any other country feature in. Maybe, you have the base system, within the top 10. You have Almaty Group, which is a Russian one. Within then, China is now also benefiting from, and profiting from war as well, because they are beginning to produce drones. They are beginning to produce tanks. People are now buying Chinese equipment, including their, air assets like, fighter jets and so on and so forth. So you have Lockheed Martins, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman. All these are American companies. And again, when we talk about the power of a certain group of people in the United States, and these people are the ones that control the pharmaceuticals, they control the banks, they control. So again, this is not a topic that is that people really want to hear about, because you don't want to be demonizing a certain group of people. You don't want to be stating that a certain group of people control anything. But the reality on the ground is it is the United States. The US is the superpower of the world, and it is throwing its weight around, and in most cases, it's not for the good and benefit of anybody. And during the course of this interaction as well, I would also talk about the theory of realism, because it's the most important tool of analysis when it comes to international relations, when it comes to even understanding foreign policy, the foreign policy and the strategic attitude of nation states, particularly the most powerful ones around the world. So this is an interesting conversation that we need to have. And like I said, I will. The first thing I need to tell you guys is that today being the 28th of August 2025, the Russians are stepping up the heat, and the Europeans don't have any answer. The Europeans have made it very clear that they are not interested in any sort of land swap. They are not interested in any sort of concrete conversation with the Russians. What they want is a complete emasculation, humiliation of Russia, with the Russian pants pulled down and stripped down in the market for everybody to see. This is what the Europeans are asking for. That a complete humiliation of Russia is what we push the Russians back, because they believe that if they do it to Ukraine today, tomorrow it could be the Baltics, it could be Poland, and it could be an all-out war between NATO and the Europeans. Of course, we are already seeing that, because NATO is arming Ukraine to the teeth. This is why maybe they don't want to declare it politically because of the optics, because of what that would involve. Nobody wants to get involved and go to the territory of an atomic war, or the use of nuclear weapons, as they say it. But it is important for us to outline and highlight what is really going on in that area. And a lot of people will say, well, this Ukraine war has been going on for about 4 years. What about the situation in Gaza? What about the situation in Lebanon? What about the situation in Sudan? I can tell you this as a matter of fact, that conflict have opened the door to every other conflict you are seeing today, including what is going on in Gaza, because what we are seeing now is a recalibration of the strategic behavior of the most powerful countries around the world, particularly like the United States of America. The attempt to control trade routes, the attempt to basically um, push a lot of people around, if you like. So it is important for us to try and understand what is going on. I think my internet is a bit slow. Hopefully, we're back now. So I'm going to pull up the map for you guys to see. For those of you that are watching me on other platforms, um, I just hope it is stable now to the extent that I can. Okay, okay. I think it's better now. I was going to show you. Let me share my screen. So this is what the major media outlets are saying about this. Second. Thank you so much, guys. For those of you just joining, don't forget to share and participate in this interesting conversation. If you have any question for me, feel free to leave your questions on our time. So the European leaders outraged after Russian strikes killed 21 and damaged EU headquarters. So the European Union's leaders are outraged. They are angry that in spite the talks with the Americans, that that Russia have refused to stop. The Russians have refused to agree to a ceasefire. And I'll go into that in a second because the Russians have made it very clear that any ceasefire that involves Ukraine, reorganizing their troops, loading arms to Ukraine again to continue fighting without any substantive agreement will not work. Despite the pressure from the United States, because the US is saying, oh, just stop fighting first. Stop. No, this is not the way it works. The Russians have an objective. The front line cannot be frozen. The Russians are not going to accept to any kind of freezing of the front line. So the European leaders are outraged after Russian strike kills 21 and damage European Union headquarters. The head of the European Union's Executive Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has spoken of her outrage at Russia's deadliest onslaught on Kyiv since July, which also damaged the EU's delegation office in the Ukrainian capital. At least 21 people, including 4 children, were taken out and dozens more wounded in the bombardment, according to the Ukrainian officials. A 5-story residential building was destroyed, and the EU mission and nearby British Council were damaged. In a strongly worded statement, von der Leyen said that the Russian missiles struck in close proximity of the diplomatic mission. 2 missiles hit in meters, which is about 165 feet of the delegation within 20 seconds. Well. Yeah, so the way this is panning out, I think what the Americans are trying to do as well is to extricate themselves from this and saying, oh, if you guys don't want to stop fighting, we are not going to get involved in this anymore. All we can do as well is to protect our interest. But we cannot protect our interest by allowing the Russians to win. You need to understand, the US is not and will not allow Russia to win outrightly. Because if Russia wins outrightly, what about the deals that the Americans have signed? What about the billions of dollars that they have given to Ukraine? Well, Ukraine is saying that the part of the money that the Russian asset frozen should be taken and as payment for the Russia for America for supporting Ukraine during the course of this war, and that the Russians should pay some sort of reparation or restitution to Ukraine. Well, that's not going to happen. I mean, if you're talking about paying reparation at this point in time where the conflict just started, what do you expect? The Russians are not going to listen to you or to anybody. They are going to fight until the end, and this is what the Russians are doing.